position this as our open source sessions as an opportunity to engage from a collaborative perspective globally. So it's so nice for me to see that we have people from the globe actually attending today. So welcome to everyone. It's nice to have people here that we can actually engage with and talk about what, in our opinion, is something that is really imperative and important. So we are going to take a closer look, obviously, as the title says, leadership, the need to redefine future skills development. And I think it is important for us to look at what skills for the future world of work is going to be needed. So that is the blanket approach that we're going to look at this first open source session. So just from some housekeeping perspectives, so the content that we're going to look at is MTPs, what that is. I'm going to talk about in more detail, partnering with automation, what is the management and leadership perspective, and some of the research that we have done to date. So just housekeeping, if I may ask for everybody just to keep their mics muted while we're busy. I have got my colleagues is online. They will manage the chat. So please, if you've got questions, please ask in between, because I know sometimes that if we leave questions right to the end, or engagements, or even comments or opinions, we sometimes lose some of the important things that we want to say. So if you can please share with us, we will appreciate that. If there's like something burning you want to share with us, just raise your hand and we will allow for the engagement to happen. So I'm quite comfortable with us to chat in between, although I'm just going to be conscious of time because we just have the next hour together. So any questions at this point? We're all comfortable? Well, I hope so. Okay. So let's quickly look. So first of all, I want to just look at, so we can go through the whole conversation of COVID, the impact of COVID, and sort of we're moving beyond that, because although COVID is still with us, we're very much at a point where COVID has actually put a magnifying glass on the things that we knew we needed to do and to prioritize even before COVID happened from an organizational perspective. We have seen a lot of disruption and disruptive technologies coming our way. So it doesn't really matter in what industry you actually play. We are all being disrupted. I think the reality is that chaos is here. We need to find a way to organize the chaos and to deal with it. And that is where organizational change and change management protocols become the new constant. So when we look at exponential growth, we very much look at how do we exponentially develop. And a lot of the moment is it's not a curve that's a lateral growth curve. We can't look at engagements in the way we do things as a multiplier of we're going to increase our sales by 5% or 6% per annum. There's this exponential factor that comes into play, and it looks at growth of a system to which the amount being added to the system is proportional to the amount that is already present, which means it's exponential. That curve just goes. And I think that if we can coin it, it's the and the bigger the system, the greater the increase. And it's nearly the guys in the garage that we talk about that becomes very disruptive to our environments. It's the people we don't know about. And we need to look at what is an exponential organization? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by having strategic plans for the exponential era? Because we are living in the exponential era. Before COVID, we would have looked at certain of the disruptive technologies, which we'll look at in a moment. And we would have said the next 5 to 10 years. But the growth has actually become exponential. To use an example, if we think about something like 3D printing, 3D printing has actually been with us for the past 35 years. It's not something that is only now. but we know the impact of that more now than what we did when it started. Because when we deal with this exponential curve, we have what is called a below the line development framework. So it is the guy in the garage that you're not aware of. And a lot of times we kick against it. And that brings me to the next slide. When we look at exponential growth, if we look at the computers in itself, and if you look to the slide there, we look at over the last 110 years, within this ecosystem itself, there has been exponential growth. The doubling factor has happened the whole time. So one of my favorite books is actually Exponential Organizations, and I've got a lot of respect for Salim Ismail, who is one of the key authors. And he talks about this doubling effect where you have 0.001 doubling will give you 0.002, and that's how it will go. But the moment it gets to a certain level, the growth is unstoppable nearly. And we can take a moment here and we can look at disruptive technologies and disruptive businesses that happens. I don't want to necessarily go into examples that we all know about, like Uber, Airbnb, but that is just our reality, and that has disrupted skills and skills development as well, and how we need to be ready for the future world of work. So for all of those of you that came in late, welcome. So let's look at some of the disruptive technologies. I'm going to just mention a few. So sorry, I just want to get them all there. So we know about artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, space, and Elon Musk is a good example of wanting to go to Mars. 3D printing, I spoke about earlier. Medical innovation is just next level that's happening there. High-speed travel, robotics, blockchain, and some of this is already old. And I think our reality is it is changing at a rapid space and time. The quadrants we're currently experiencing is a lot. With where we are, we have this ethical obligation to look at this is our reality. The fact that technology is going to enhance and grow exponentially. Our biggest question is, how do we engage it, and how do we prepare our future workforce so that they have got the required skills so that we can remain current? Because we are going to face a skills deficit globally if we do not keep up to date with the potential enhancements that is coming. And that is with embracing it and looking at some of those changes. So I'd like to pause just here where we look at what is the massive transformational purpose. So this is one of our first topics. So with exponential organizations and exponential growth, I think one of the biggest challenges that we are facing is the fact that having a traditional mission and vision statement is no longer enough. The next generation, Gen Zs and millennials that's in our organizations and starting to enter, they want to know, how do they belong to a bigger purpose, a bigger why? It's our duty to be able to position our whys very clearly. And we need to understand that through a value chain, we make a difference. We are all part of this ecosystem and this value chain, and we have an ethical obligation as being part of this ecosystem of how do we contribute and how do we make a difference within the value chain. And that does mean that as businesses, we need to ask ourselves, so what is some of our really transformative things that we would like to achieve? If we think of Google, Google goes and they say they want to organize the world's knowledge, the world's information. And that's actually quite transformative from a perspective of making a really significant and big difference. And we need to look at, so what is some of the things that we need to do? So one of the challenges we face is that from a traditional organizational perspective, we, like any ecosystem, the moment something foreign comes in, our immune system kicks against it. Just like in our bodies, if something foreign comes in, we kick against it. And that in itself means, as leaders, we have this responsibility to hone that immune system response. So, you know, a lot of times when we look at change and we look at the exponential era that we find ourselves in and the disruption that's happening, we want to kick against the change in this disruption because it doesn't feel normal. However, we need to hone the disruption. So how do we create an organizational environment where the immune system doesn't naturally want to kick against any change that it experiences? So how do we cultivate that immune system? How do we change that immune system? And Salim Ismail, in his book Exponential Organizations, he says the deadly internal threat is resisting disruptive innovation, which hinders organizations and teams from adopting attributes needed to achieve exponential growth. That is the corporate immune response. We kick against change. I was in a privileged position today, actually, to with a group of our young team members. They've been with our organization anything between a year to 2 years. They first entered our organization as interns, and they work in our research and development department. And I was very blessed to be part of a recruitment process with them where they actually own the entire value chain of recruiting new research and development interns. As leaders, we have really not been involved in the process at all. We've been with them from a framework point of view, but they have owned it. And what was really nice is that they became involved with that entire recruitment and selection protocol, which in a typical process would have been owned from a human resources point of view or from the departmental head. But they own it because the individuals who's coming to work with them is going to work with them, is going to make their team either stronger or not. They're going to have to take on the main responsibilities of coaching individuals with the output that's required. And that was a very nice way for me to see that in our own organizational immune system, can we actually deal with change and do things differently? And that's not just linked to this disruptive technology, but also to do things differently. And some of the questions that I would like to ask is, what are some of our biggest threats for us as organizations right now? So it is important that we take some time and unpack. We have various organizations and various industries represented today in our open source session. But if there's any takeaway that you take away from today's session is maybe to go and do some introspection with your team or with your company and to ask, so what is our biggest threat? And actually, it's not our competitors necessarily. It is the rapid changes that happens around us, the disruption, and with that, making sure that we have got the right skill sets. And then there's other challenges, and that reflection and introspection becomes really important. Then the next one is, how do we build a set of capabilities to harness digital innovation? So who becomes part of digital innovation? Who's in those teams? So I referred earlier to our R&D team taking responsibility for their own recruitment and selection process for interns. And we need to look at how do we bring new talent in? How do we harness that? How do we push innovation out from the lab to the testing teams? And I think that's really important. So going to market, when we talk about your minimum viable product, your MVPs, it becomes really critical for us to know that the timeline between testing and going to market has shortened dramatically. And there's a requirement for us to be able to harness that and work with teams at a much faster rate. We need to look at how do we do that, and a little bit later I'll share a little bit more details around that. Then the next one is, how do we attract and retrain the next generation? So how do we do that? And if we actually look at what are some of the strategies that we need to do, because people aren't necessarily going to be given the skills that is required from a traditional perspective. So what are we doing? How are we honing organizations plus the educational construct? How are we working together to make sure that we actually deal with the right digital talent that we need? And then last question that I feel is important for us as organizations to reflect on is, how do we drive and sustain innovation velocity across the entire organization? So innovation is not just within an innovation team or a research team. It is actually something that needs to be owned across the entire value chain of the company. So you know, having teams, hybrid teams, matrix teams that is from different business units, different walks of life, different levels within the organization involved in the process becomes so important. So these are just some questions that I do believe is important for reflection, to take back within companies, to actually sit with and talk about, so that we can actually look at how can we develop our massive transformational purpose? Because it is imperative as organizations that we start pushing towards the fact that disruption is the constant, and we need to prepare for that. Then we spoke about automation. Now I would like to just talk about hyper automation. I think we are now very much in a process of hyper automation where everything is accelerated, and yeah, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. Sorry. So this is where I would like to talk about partnering with automation. And yes, very much, Andrew, you made a comment with regard to how it is important from a traditional educational construct to be able to deal with making sure that the young entrants leaving the educational environment into the place of work is actually prepared. And how do we do that? And that is one of the things that we would like to look at later. I don't believe we have all the answers. I think this is quite a big topic, and it requires quite a lot of people in the value chain and in the ecosystem to actually get involved and to actually want to make a difference. And if we look at partnering with automation, we need to embrace it. We need to become the first example of it is okay. It is okay to work with automation. It is okay to be disruptive. So how would we go about this? Some strategies to look at that I personally feel is quite important, and that is to learn and take action. I think the quicker we learn to fail, the quicker we make mistakes, the better. And we must be okay with that, but we need to fail forward. So with every success, there has been multiple failures, and I think it becomes so important that we do that. How do we hone that digital transformation that needs to take place? Leadership development initiatives that have a real business impact. Earlier today, I shared, or it was yesterday, I can't remember, I shared in McKinsey's report, and I just would like to read it to you guys, that only 10% of CEOs believe that their company's leadership development initiatives have a clear business impact. Now that's scary. We spend thousands of rands, dollars, whatever your currency is, on leadership development. And if it doesn't have a real impact, it is a problem. Because the leaders are the people that have to set the pace. It should be a top down, not a bottom up. So how do we do that? How do we make sure that our leadership initiatives is impactful? For me, I'm personally a cheerleader, a champion of of applied competence. I firmly believe in creating opportunities, workshops, sessions where people are given real life problems to solve based on learning that has taken place, not just the theoretical component of it. Then build scalable, fast-moving, smart teams. We need to understand that our young generation, the new generation, we have an ethical obligation of preparing them not just for the place of work, but also for the leadership demands that's going to come. Please tell me what leadership book has prepared us for a global pandemic and the challenges that came with it. I think we're writing the case studies as we're experiencing it. These models, these frameworks that we can refer to, but the requirement and the adaptiveness that is within this disruption that is required is a lot. And then one of the aspects that I believe is very important is psychological safety. I think in organizations, this is so undervalued. And I think that we should create a safe place for people to make mistakes. Because that allows us to engage with automation and hyper-automation far more effectively when people feel that it is okay to test, to see if something can work, to come up, speak up, tell you about ideas that they have. And that is creating an environment of that collaboration. So the collaboration is with the artificial intelligence, the computing side of things, the software side of things, but it's also where we've failed previously is to engage our teams and engage our human capital in such a way that they feel comfortable to test, comfortable to make mistakes. And that experimentation is actually something that we have an obligation towards to create an environment that it's okay to experiment. And that then obviously brings with the last one for me, which is the collaboration. I don't believe within one organization we sit with all the answers. It is important to look at partners and individuals, and I think that is part of the reason why we at Omni feel running sessions like open source become so important. Because the more we engage, the more we create platforms for each other to have a voice, to talk about previous experiences of what you have done, the more we actually go, oh, okay, that's a great idea. And we collaborate and we learn from each other from that point of view. But that just can't be an external thing. We can't be comfortable just doing it externally. Are we actually cultivating that internally? So we know when we look at personal development or we look at an individual, we also say there's internal, intrinsic development that we need to look at. And then there's also the external development. But that internal development is so important. So as organizations, we also need to look at that. So when we look at the automation and the model there for hyper-automation, I think it is just for us to understand that automation in itself has evolved. We look at process modeling. I don't want to go into too much detail with regard to this specifically. We'll cover it in some of our open source sessions later on in this year. But we need to understand that we've got to look at how do we create an environment where people feel comfortable to partner with automation and that they're not going to feel like they're making mistakes. There's one last comment on this slide that I would like to make, and when it comes to psychological safety, and I noticed somebody earlier in the chat said how important it is, and you are quite right. Amy Edmondson, which is the Harvard researcher around psychological safety, she said there's three key things. It's the emphasis on how important contribution is, and we need to allow our people to contribute. Second one is to ask for honest feedback and thank people for that feedback. It sounds simplistic, but it's actually so valuable. And then the last one is be honest about our own failings. I think sometimes as leaders, we create this opinion that we haven't made mistakes. And it's just that simple, that iceberg type of scenario where we can only see the tip of the iceberg. So we look at this person and we say they've arrived, they're successful, they're a leader, whatever. But what we don't realize is underneath, there's been a lot of failings. There's been a lot of sleepless nights, where it's so important to realize what makes us successful in other people's eyes is sometimes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, scars, and lessons that we've learned. And it's okay to tell our story. And I think to create an environment where our people feel that they can effectively collaborate and partner with automation is an environment that allows them to embrace it, to test it, to be okay with failure. And on that, I'd like to just share some of the impact of the collaboration and partnerships. And that is that for us in our business, one of the key things that we have done and what we wanted to see was to be able to create research that allows us to collaborate effectively. And we've developed what we refer to as our stack model, which we'll share in more detail as we go on through our open source sessions. Then secondly is obviously ethical leadership, and to make sure that we collaborate in such a way that we have transformative skills development. So how do we do that? How do we get there? And then last one is collaborative partnerships that help us facilitate this. Again, I want to refer back to earlier. We cannot achieve what we need to achieve by being an island on our own. We need to understand we are part of an ecosystem and a value chain. How do we contribute? And that means we're contributing with communities, we're contributing with government, we're contributing with other partners, we even collaborating with competitors. It's important because the more successful and the more excellence there is within our sphere as so-called competitors, the better, because it's the better for the end user. And it's better for our country, and it's better for the globe. And that social impact is what becomes really important and imperative. So let's move on. Let's look at some of the management perspectives. Skills gaps are poised to grow. I don't think that's a debate. I must be honest. I think we all are here because we can see the exponential increase in the gaps and the challenges that we experience. What's very interesting is that research shows that with the pandemic and with exponential development in automation and artificial intelligence, we do run the risk of actually having bigger gaps than what we've had before. And this is a unique opportunity for us to become part of the solution and not the problem. So are we shifting the problem statement? So I would like to not see the skills gap grow anymore. I would rather like to see how do we just make it more available. Then, according to the World Economic Forum, I would like to just share this with you. Access to skilled workers is already a key factor that sets successful organizations apart from failing ones. It's increasing data-driven and complex futures will become even more, the differences will become even more acute. Skills gap across industries are poised to grow in the fourth industrial revolution. Rapid advancement in AI, robotics, and other emerging technology is happening at a shorter cycles and changing the very nature of jobs. We cannot sit still. We can't wait for somebody else to do it. It's got to be us. So how do we go about that? And we need to address and implement training strategies in new fields of advancement. How do we do that? Develop mindsets and behaviors, emphasize digital thinking, cultivate curiosity, transform learning methods, and transform learning departments. I know this is a mouthful, but if we take a moment and just say that we cannot do skills development like we used to. There is a place for our educational frameworks and constructs. I do believe that they're very important and they have to be there. But what we need to do is we need to look at how do we become more agile. If you think about curriculum and curriculum development, it can take a year, 2 years to develop a curriculum in detail with all the modules and nuances that come into it. And we know that is just, it's physically impossible for that to take place in the rapid changing world and be okay with that type of curriculum when it is not actually bespoke enough for the environment in which it needs to be applied. We need to be transforming our learning methods. This is a good example. Face-to-face was one format. We need to get to hybrid, so face-to-face plus online, pure self-directed learning, and then blended. Online learning plus face-to-face application modes, and the entire educational construct must be able to allow for that. However, that takes a lot of investment, not just rands and cents, but also investment of time from our curriculum developers, all our stakeholders, all our policymakers. It is just a big wheel to change. Problem is we don't have time. We're running out of it. And then if we look at how organizations just approach skills development, we do the formal training and learning. Then we get to individual learning, job-based measurements and analytics, and then we do a sustainable performance improvement. We sort of need to get away from just wanting to do the first layer. We need to start working on all the layers, nearly all at once, plus understanding that the layers need to be adapted the whole time. And those strategies are difficult. It's not easy. It's not easy to be that agile, especially when we're dealing with bigger institutions. And yes, Linda, I just caught your comment. The educationalist very much needs to listen to industry and business. There needs to be this collaboration. That's why it's not just partnering with automation, it is partnering in the value chain, in the ecosystem. We're not islands on our own. We need to have an interconnectedness, and we need to do things better. The question is, we just need to hone it. We need to decide where, and that's part of the reason why Omni started the open source sessions, is to say, well, let's just create an opportunity to talk. We might not be able to change everything, but we can change where we are, and we can influence where we are, and with you. And hopefully somewhere along the line, we actually start getting it right. But yes, you're right, that connection is very important. Then I just want to quickly mention this. Skills development of the future. 80% of our time should be spent on teaching things for the future. It shouldn't be on past. It should be on what is needed for the future. Academically speaking, we spend most of our time in the past, previous theories, previous things that was developed and models that evolved, theories that were proven. We need to complement that traditional, because there's a place for it, so don't get me wrong. Understanding the past, understanding where we're coming from is important, but it needs to be in a real-time mode. So how do we make it real-time? How do we create the adaptation in our skills development, in our educational models, that it does allow for real-time? Everywhere else we work real-time. Most organizations, we the more real-time information you have, the better, the more better competitive advantage you have. Why is education any different? So at this junction, I'd like to invite my colleague and my fellow researcher, Cindy Lont, to just join me online. This is just where I would like to just share a few minutes on, hi Cindy, thanks for joining me, on our research that we had the privilege of presenting overseas. Both Cindy and myself had the privilege of going to Utrecht in the Netherlands, where we presented, and it was really a great privilege to be there with other like-minded individuals and other educationalists that has a passion for actually making a difference globally within education in the future world of work. And at this junction, Cindy and I are just going to have a conversation. Our research is available. It has been published. The link is there. We will make the presentation available afterwards, and obviously then you would be able to access the research. But Cindy, thanks for joining me. It's very nice to have another voice. Now I'm not talking by myself. So can I just ask, in your opinion, why was it imperative for us to do this research?
Sure. I think, Lisa, there's a couple of components. Sorry, I sound like you.
I can hear you fine. I think everybody else, yeah.
Perfect. So I think the whole concept of fourth industrial revolution, change, future world of work was becoming something that everybody was talking about and debating. And no matter what conference you went to or what article you opened, there was this new concept and new idea that the world was starting to go crazy about. And I believe that when we looked at it from a research perspective, we needed to ask ourselves the question in terms of learning and development heads. Well, what is it that we need to know and understand in this space? Because if we truly want to be able to partner with our clients and make a significant impact to the learners in our space, then we need to ensure that we're pulling these learning concepts through. The challenge I think we found when we started doing the research was that you hear blockchain, robotics, nanotechnology, AI, augmented reality. I can get those words now around my lips. But the point is that we know that all of the technology components is having a significant impact on the world and the world of work and how we operate. But I think what came out of our research is that we were forgetting the people components of it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how, just as you've been speaking this afternoon and sharing all those concepts, we know there's new jobs that are going to be created. We know there's these new concepts that's going to come into our world of work. But the comments, just as they've been coming through and I've been reading, the biggest impact for South Africa in our South African context is that we have to start asking ourselves the question, are our people ready? Are our school leavers ready? Are our university students ready?
Yeah.
And that's where for us, when we start going, why was it important? It was because from our perspective, we want to make a difference in terms of that human connection. So understanding automation, but that we need to partner with it.
Yeah.
And that's where Omni came in and going, sure, there's something else here that we're missing. And how do we make sure we start tapping into the people element of making sure we're ready for the future world of work?
Awesome. And I so agree with you, because I think that is one of our biggest imperatives. And some of the comments that has come through is, yes, there's lots of learning solutions like gamification. There's great software tools available. We just need to hone it. So how do we hone it? How do we create those collaborative partnerships to enable us to do that? And then also another comment that just came in was the death of MBA. And what I mean by that, or I'm not using my own words in Dennis in your comment, but it is about how do we make it very real around the now. And I totally agree with you. I think for us it was an imperative of looking at how do we become agile enough to support workplace and business sectors in such a way that it makes an impactful difference for them in the now for the future. not
100%.
in the past for the potential, but the now for the future. Um, and yeah, and we still haven't arrived, because that comes to the next question that I'd like to ask you is, are we done with our research?
No, definitely not. I think the point is that the research is great,
Mm.
but we then had to ask ourselves the question, so what are we doing about it? So, I mean, as a FET college, we know we operate within the space of learning and development, and we work within our current CETA SACRA landscape in
Yeah.
South Africa. And I think we're not going to open the debate, but I think we all know that we have challenges with our education system. From schooling, in terms of what our kids get that prepare them for the world of work, but also just in our occupational qualifications and the learnerships that we are offering our learners to move them into the workspace. And then those that are sitting in the workplace that are looking for further education. Now, we have these fabulous qualifications, but they're missing the essence of the change that we're talking about here. So a
Yeah.
lot of our qualifications are potentially old, they're outdated. And so, yes, we have this theoretical concepts that are coming through, but I don't know if we were preparing them for the world of work. I still don't know if we are. I mean, I've got two boys in high school, and I sometimes want to just run away when I see some of the learning that they get exposed to, which is great. My son asked me the other day, why must I learn about the Eiffel Tower? What's the point? And, and it's a difficult question to answer because I want to have a very logical reason, and I did. But the other thing that I'm missing is, so where are you learning about world of work? Where are we teaching them this soft skills components, the business work readiness components? And so, yeah, so I mean, in our space, it really was around saying we have the research, what are we going to do? And
Mm.
that resulted in us creating our very innovative, creative, and disruptive curriculum around bridging the gap between the automation and all those big fancy words of robotics and the people component, and bringing the two together
Yeah.
and really embedding that learning in the qualifications that we offer, creating career paths for people from out of school through the levels
Mm.
on SACWA, but ensuring that we're building in those critical soft skills that are potentially missing, that we're not giving our school leavers and our university leavers.
And I think to your point, Cindy, I think part of that was why it's so important to create, if you've got a contract or a framework, which is our educational framework, so SACWA, CETA, whichever body globally you belong to, because there's a framework. Because otherwise, how do we create consistency? How do we make sure there's quality parameters? You always need a policy or a framework. But the disruption is, do we as skills development or educationalists have the ability to blend?
Yeah.
So if this is the construct that we have to play in, can we bring in the collaborative models, the innovation, the real-time solution that can actually blend nicely with them? So they creates that there is a way to do it. It just takes more out of the stakeholders. It takes a more creative way, especially if policy hasn't changed right now, and if maybe they're not ready. And I think that's part. Some of my notes, my other research, and I'll talk about it in the next sessions coming, but is about some of the disruption that we're experiencing. But are we ready to actually deal with that? Because, like I said earlier, the immune system is kicking against it. We've always done it like this. So we've always had, this has always been the way. We've done schooling or university or post-school education. Um, but we've always done it like this. If we know it in business to be, it's something we shouldn't say, because we should hone creativity and innovation. And just because we've done it that doesn't mean it will serve us in the future.
Absolutely.
And that brings me to the last question is, can you maybe share with our audience what other developments based on our research we are potentially looking at?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think initially we landed with sort of a curriculum that was the ten skills that we felt was the critical components to support the future world of work. But as those evolved, and as you said, from the time you did this research to where we are now, it feels like the other day, but yet like miles apart.
Yes.
And the reason for that, I think, is just because things are evolving so quickly. And so there was two critical components that came out as we started doing the research. The one was authentic and ethical leadership.
Yeah.
And I mean, the fundamental thing is that we can have all these great ideas and creative, innovative out the box, and we can challenge people to change and do new and amazing things that we know are going to be impactful. But if we don't have the authentic and ethical leadership, we're going to fail. So Lisa, you mentioned just now when you spoke about COVID, and that there is no textbook and no research paper, no case study that prepared any leader in the world for the decisions that that needed to be taken last year in business. Just as you've said often, if anybody tells you that they know the right answer, they're lying to you, because there is no right answer. And so for us, it was just the authentic and the ethical leadership just becomes so critical when we look at making decisions around business. And then with that came the concepts of change, because every day change is consistent. And so two things. One is the me, myself, and I change, and looking at it differently. So we know there's lots of change modules and models and frameworks. We know that. And we cover that in our curriculum. But it's also about saying it's no longer the same. Those little 4-step or 5-step process for change is great, but it's so much more than that.
Mm.
So when you combine the me, myself, and I with the concept of organizational change, and then you underpin it with authentic and ethical leadership, then you can start getting excited about understanding how it all starts fitting together.
Yeah.
So then we go school curriculum, university curriculum. We need those leaders to come pull through as well and start understanding what is it that their roles are so
Mm.
critical to be played to start making the difference. And then the last thing is just the research doesn't end there, because as we move forward, so you realize as things change, the research needs to evolve with it. So, I mean, we know we've got another research paper coming out soon that will look at these specific concepts around ethical and authentic leadership. And hopefully we can continue to build on that to make the difference that we just hope to achieve through it.
Yeah, no, I so agree, and I think it ties in so nicely with having a massive transformational purpose. I think that we forget that we are individuals within a society. We contribute. So the way we lead, we make a contribution to our communities, to our people. And I think that that's why, with a shift in organization, it's moved from shareholder to stakeholder value. And that is even a shift within leadership. Leadership cannot just be a selfish approach of making decisions just for the few. It's about the broader spectrum. It's the balancing act between what's good for the institution, the organization, plus what's good for the people that benefit from that organization. And that ethics in itself can sometimes be very, very challenging. And then even looking at the ethics in relation to all the developments that's happening around automation. I mean, we just look at drones and the fact that we can use that to make a huge difference by getting drones to deliver medicine in very rural environments. Or the extreme is we can use drones to in war. So the ethical application of certain technology is also why leadership and ethics in leadership becomes so important. And one of my favorite quotes is from Jack Ma, who's the ex-CEO of the Alibaba Group, is where he talks about what we will need is more ethical leaders. And I couldn't agree with him more. But to get to that ethical leadership and what does it mean, and to define it, and to also look at what's ethics for me versus ethics for you, that's potentially where the debate is. And it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds as we move forward this year and as the research takes us in a new spin.
The concepts coming out in the research is very interesting.
Yes, very much so. Cindy, you're welcome to stay on. I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time. I've got 5 minutes left, and I promise I will be quick. There was a question earlier with regard to our research. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate your contribution. With regard to our research and research methodologies and stuff. So from an academic perspective, if you are interested and you want to know more, please just engage with us. We'll share that with you. We even have our academic presentation that was done in Utrecht at the university. So we're happy to share that. That's part of the reason why we do this, part of the reason why it's called open source. It is supposed to be an opportunity to share, to collaborate with each other, and for you to find benefit from the sessions. So if I just quickly look at the research, some of our research findings, and I really don't want to spend too much time here because we're running out of time, but I just maybe can highlight the last paragraph there is partnering with automation and specifically AI efficacy within an organization to ensure compliance with regulatory legislation, staff and potential challenges is critical to ensure that leadership in the 2030 is current. So again, this is all about collaboration. This is all about our entire construct within our organizations, understanding what is happening with the future world of work and what the disruption is. We have an ethical obligation within skills development. We can't just get rid of our staff. My question that I'd like to pose to you at this junction is, we do skills development. Sure, we have got a path and career pathing and talent management strategies, but that's for where we are. What about the skills development strategies that we need concurrent with the now for the future? Our biggest challenges, skills development partners in organizations, is to try and influence organizations to understand we need two strategies now. We need one for now to cope with the now, but we also need one for the future. And how does that look? And that is really a transformational skills development strategy. That is an MTP, or skill development in itself. And then you're welcome to just look at the quote when I share it, but just some of our key research findings I'd like to just share with you in the last minute. Automating innovation and advancement of technologies are going to be major disruptions. I think that's a given. Changes in occupational skill sets would transform the world of work, requiring organizations and employees to work at remaining relevant. So how are we going to do this? How are we going to help people remain relevant? What are we doing differently? New categories of work is going to begin to emerge. I think that's very clear. If you think about it, a few years ago, we didn't have to have a drone license. We didn't even know drones exist. Now you have drone licensing. In farming, they make use of drones, self-driving tractors. Now you don't need a tractor driver. You need somebody that can sit in a computer room and operate these systems. That's a very different skill set. How are we going to go about that? If we think about data engineers, data analysts, big data, that wasn't with us a few years ago. Now those are very critical skills, but how are we developing it? And the last one is the need for upskilling, reskilling, and unskilling becomes important. So again, I come back to where I shared the two development pathways that we nearly need to have within most organizations. And those are some of the critical research findings. Part of this has led us to develop what we refer to as our Workforce 2030 model. If you're interested, we will share it with you. However, it wasn't part of the content for today. And then lastly, when we did our original research, we based it on the World Economic Forum's research that they did around what is the critical skills that will be required for 2030. And as Cindy mentioned earlier, what is important is to understand that it's not cast in stone. This is something that changes the whole time. And as the world evolves, those skill sets evolve. Um, and if we look at the type of skills, so the key skills towards the bottom of the World Economic Forum's model is problem solving, critical thinking, computational thinking, lots of information. How do I make sense of this? How do I read it? Self-management, so important. Um, how do I do self-directed learning? How future world of work, if we think about workspaces, the fact that we're not all in the same workspace. If you're not self-managed, how are you going to work from home? If nobody's monitoring your task activities, but they're monitoring your output only. Working with people, that's even more challenging now than it's been in the past. Now we have people that are either purely remote, or some of them are remote and office, or some of them is just office. So from a leadership point of view, dealing with remote working and flexible working is a challenge. Some of the countries globally have been at an advantage where that is concerned because they've done this before, but at the moment, not everybody has had that. So it's a new leadership challenge. And then obviously technology, software development, and the uses thereof is critical. And we need to look at how do you underpin work integrated learning. So the pathways become important. So the construct for education is key, but how do you blend that with application? We need to move away from just lateral education system. We need to look at applied competence, which I referred to earlier. Pace is going to increase dramatically. We need to be clear on our change strategies. And the last one is people are at the heart of our ability to adapt. And the quicker we hone our biggest asset, which is our human capital, the better we will be as organizations, as countries, and as an ecosystem globally that actually is dependent on each other. So on that, upcoming sessions is going to be exponential organizations, so scaling beyond, scaling for 2021 and beyond. That's on the 30th of June, and then organizational change. This is the next 2 sessions that's coming. Again, going to be a similar type of format. The intent is to provide you with access to information, for engagement. And at this junction, I know I'm 2 minutes over, so I apologize for running over. But I want to just ask, is there any questions? Does anybody want to say something before we just wrap up the session? I'll just give a moment.
Lisa,
Yes.
there was one question that came through, and it came through right at the beginning when you were talking about the
Oh,
technology. So I don't know if you want to have a go at this one.
okay,
But the
perfect.
question was from Andrea. She asked, how do you believe that blockchain technologies are going to impact the workforce? I know it's one of your favorite subjects, so I thought I'd throw that one in there for you.
It's only one of my favorite subjects because my early career was in the financial services sector, and I think blockchain is going to be very disruptive for financial services, just like fintech is. I think any financial technology that yes, that's not normal to what we are used to, disrupts our environment. Andrea, with blockchain, very interesting. I think that there's still some niggles with the authentication processes, so they're still sorting that out in certain models or modes. But I do believe blockchain is something we need to prepare for. It's authorization frameworks that is, if you look at typical things like when we look at finance, we want an arm's length approach. We refer to it as an arm's length approach. So if somebody authorizes something, then somebody else must release it, and they mustn't necessarily be in the same space or environment, and or can't be influenced by people. And I think blockchain is going to expedite that. It's going to be very, very interesting. And it's going to be very interesting because it's not going to be honed by certain individuals. It's definitely going to be disruptive. And it is definitely one of the technology or the technology enhancements that I think is going to have a big impact on the corporate environment, and especially financial services, in my opinion. But it's a space to, I'm definitely not an expert. in that, but it's definitely a space to watch.
Watch.
And if we get more research or we get more information, happy to share.
It's a pleasure, Andrea. Andrea said thank you for addressing her question.
Oh,
And then the other comment that was just sort of coming through, and there was a couple of people that answered on it, Lisa. And I know it's something that Omni is driving hard at the moment in terms of collaborative partnerships
yeah.
and building those sort of opportunities for us to share information and be willing to do that at quite a high level. And
Yeah.
so the comment versus sort of question is that creating those collaborative relationships and getting other leaders to be prepared to open up and engage and share is a challenge. So, yeah, maybe you just want to comment on that in terms of your thoughts and opinions, just on how we can achieve that and overcome some of those barriers and challenges. Because we know it's important, and we know that without it in the current world, we just cannot achieve what we want to achieve. So, your thoughts?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer this question if it's okay with the audience, from a personal perspective. So if you're selfish and you keep everything for yourself, there's a tendency not to be able to have a multiplying factor. When you start sharing, there's something wonderful that happens in the world out there, is that all of a sudden things start multiplying. So for me, knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. Information shared is information multiplied. And if we can share in a way that allows other people to learn from our mistakes or learn from some of the research we've done, then why would we not do it? Why would we want to make somebody else walk a very, very difficult path? Why? Why, if we can help them a little bit? So for me, maybe it's a little bit altruistic, and maybe not from a leadership perspective or from a business perspective. No, but we can't share that, or they're going to steal our what do you call it, our mix for our competitive advantage. And I'm going, but if somebody wants to steal something, aren't they going to steal it in any case? So I'll much rather engage, talk, share as much as I possibly can, obviously being compliant with the whole POPI Act and Information Act and that type of thing. But realistically, if we can engage and we can talk, it does open up the multiplying factor. It opens up opportunities to learn from each other. And really, for me, from Omni's perspective, from our ecosystem, who we are as an organization, plus the value chain that we play in, I love to rather share. It allows us to have an expedited process of learning. If we keep information to ourselves, we don't learn. It's selfish. Sorry, I am very much answering it from a personal perspective. To get leaders to do that and leaders to engage, I think that if your leaders can't see the benefit, it's to help them see it. Um, help them see how creating engaging teams and learning from each other from a collaborative point of view is the way to go. Collaboration and engaging with each other is how we start making a significant difference. We don't do it as an island or an individual. We do it collectively. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, definitely. I can just see from the comments in terms of people responding. So that's absolutely great. Thank you. Look, there were lots of other comments just around obviously some of the challenges around the changes and the schooling system and those sort of ideas or areas that need to be looked at. And I think probably from the chat, I can see that there's lots of us that are working really hard to make an impactful difference.
Yeah.
Between our schools, our FET colleges, public as well as private, and the universities, which is great to see. I think it's probably one of the most challenging areas. We know we need to make the change, but
Yeah.
but the how and the with who.
Yes, and I think that just as a last and a closing comment from my side is if we are clear on our why, if we're very clear on why we do what we do and what helps us wake up every morning, being passionate about our path and being passionate about our engagement and where we're going, it becomes so much easier just to engage and so much easier to be part of the solution. And I think that there isn't a problem in the world that doesn't have potential solutions. I think we need to just move beyond the why it can't work and rather say, okay, let's listen, let's collaborate, let's talk about it, and let's test it. I think we have too many experts out there that believe that because they're experts, they see the risk so much quicker. They see the reason why it can fail so much quicker. And there is a place for that.
Yeah.
So don't get me wrong. But there's also this unique space where we are now, where if we actually engage and if we actually collaborate, we can start testing and looking at potential solutions in just in an exponential manner. And that excites me. That's where I want to play.
100%. It looks like you've got some people that want to play with you there.
I see so. Well, if it's an indication, we are now 11 minutes over our time and we still have people online. So that's definitely an indication. And from my side, I very much just want to say a huge thank you to everyone. I do look forward to seeing you guys online on a monthly basis for the rest of this year. And in the first quarter of next year, we're going to have monthly sessions like this, most probably towards the end of each month, more or less this time, um, to just create momentum where this is concerned. If there's anything that you want to share with us or topic that you feel we must maybe chat about, or if you want to collaborate with us, please, there's my email. It's on your screens. You should be able to see it. Pop me an email. Let me know. I'd really look forward to engaging with you. And yeah, we want to be part of the value train to make a difference. And we can't do it alone. We can do it with yourselves. And if we work together and look at ways, then that would be great. I do see a question around, Cindy, can you just maybe grab that
Yeah.
around collaboration and intellectual property rights? That's all that caught my eye is intellectual property rights. So sorry, I
No.
don't know what the question is.
Oh, it says information to the age of intellectual property rights seems to be over. Oh, it was more of a comment, Lisa.
Oh,
Somebody just saying that the age of sort of keeping all our intellectual property to ourselves seems to be over,
yeah, I
in
think
terms of the impact of information sessions like this and collaboration.
yes, I think the biggest thing is that information is freely available, meaning it's on Google, it's on our platforms. We can go and read up anything or find anything. Our biggest challenge in skills development and in education is looking at the applied competence of information available and how we look at scenarios and how those models and techniques actually get applied within those processes. Um, and yes, there's certain things that will always have intellectual property rights. If you think about development, if you look at software technology and that type of thing. So I think that will actually just have an impact going forward. But yeah, it's definitely a topic and it's some challenges. So from
Cool.
my side, we really have to wrap up now. Unfortunately, it's now 5:15. Again, just from my side, thank you for your contribution. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaging audience. I really appreciate it. And like I said, any questions, comments, concerns, we'll come back to you within the chat. Otherwise, please just pop me an email and I will respond to you. So thank you so much. We'll share the slides and the recording that will be made available and the research as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. It was a privilege having you all.